Now that you have a basic understanding of how to add different UI elements to your application, either via the design view or through the XAML view, it's time to start taking that to the next level and understanding how we work with different layouts within our application. So what's a layout really? A layout is just a mechanism or a series of controls that are available for you to really make your user interface flow nicely. So yes, we could absolutely just randomly start adding buttons and text boxes and text blocks and sliders and things of that nature to our UI, but there's going to be a lot of randomness to it if we don't have some semblance of structure. So in this lesson, we're going to talk about three main layout controls that you have at your disposal that are fairly popular and that really give you a lot of ability to lay out your design in a very logical manner. Now, the default when you create new XAML pages is going to be this concept of a grid. So when we talk about a grid, it's going to give you the ability to do exactly what you think it would do. You're able to define or divide your user interface up into different pieces and then give you the ability to lay out your UI elements in a grid style coordinate system. So how do we do that? Well, we start by creating this grid here. So this is our layout. And then within here, we can start to define some properties within the grid known as column definitions. And there's also its sister, row definitions. So what these two collections of column definitions and row definitions allow you to do is to define instances of columns and rows and lay them out however you want them within your user interface. So let's take a look at column definitions first. So when you come into this collection, you can begin to add different instances of the column definition class. So if we just lay that in there, you're not going to see anything yet. So we have to start giving this some width. So we're going to go ahead and define this and have just a hard-coded width of 100. So you really can't see too much in here yet, and it's because there's nothing else in here. But if we were to go ahead and duplicate this line a couple of times, now you can start to see that we've got three different columns here that are represented by these column definitions. Now they have 0 indexes so that the counting of the columns is 0, 1, and 2, and we're going to see something similar with row definitions in a moment. So we could absolutely explicitly define the width of these columns if we would like, or there's a couple different options we have. We have an option called auto. So if we specify this as auto, you see that middle column kind of disappeared within here. It's still there, but what's happened now is that since we set the width to auto, that means it's going to automatically adjust its width based on the content found within that column. And since there's nothing there, it was completely smushed out of the picture and you don't really see it anymore. Now on the other side of the spectrum, we have the star. So if we specify star in here, what that says is take up as much room as you possibly can, but honor the widths of the other columns or rows if we're working in the row definitions. So as you see here now, we have the one in the middle that's auto, so we can't see that right now, but then it looks like because the other two are starred, they are evenly distributed. So if we were now to put a star in the middle, we now have three equidistant or three columns that are all of the same width because they are honoring each other's sizes. So you can explicitly give each of these columns or rows, as we'll see in a moment, this hard-coded value. We can give it a star, which is basically going to make it take up as much space as it possibly can, and auto is going to only use as much space as it absolutely needs based on the UI elements within that particular column definition. And so we can do the same thing down here in the row definition. So we'll jump down in here and we'll add some row definitions, and in this case we're adding height to these. So we'll go ahead and create three of these again, and they'll all be stars just so we're consistent. And as you can see now, I've created a nice little 3x3 grid system here. So what does that buy us? Well, just like this, it doesn't buy us anything. But if we start to add different UI elements into this grid, so let's say we add a button. Now by default, it's going to be placed kind of in this similar place where it would normally look on the UI. But now what we have is the ability to specify in what coordinate or in what cell within this grid system we want to use it. And the way that we do that is by accessing the grid property. And this grid property is available on all the UI elements, and it references the containing grid so that I can start to specify where I want this. So if this button exists within a grid, it then has access to the column and row definitions, and we can then assign where we want this button to be. So I can say grid, and I can specify the column span, row, and row span. So I could say I want this in column 2. Now remember, this is 0 based, so it's 0, 1, 2. And then maybe I want this in grid row 1 to drop it down 1. So now we see it's in the middle row in the far right column, and it's off to the left in this cell a little bit here. So we can then adjust that by adjusting its horizontal alignment and putting it in the center. So as you see here, when you place a UI element within a grid coordinate system, whatever properties you're setting on it as far as positioning are going to be relative to that particular grid system or that grid coordinate. So that's kind of a nice, it really opens up the ability for you to create very symmetrical UIs to make sure things are laid out nicely. Instead of just kind of eyeballing things, you can now create a nice grid system for yourself to assist you in laying out those elements. Along a similar vein, which we've kind of seen before, we have this concept of a stack panel, which is another very popular mechanism for laying out user interfaces. Now, the difference between the grid and the stack panel is that the stack panel is more of a I'm going to take care of the layout for you type control, where I can just begin to add a series of UI elements in here and it's going to automatically place them either in a vertical or horizontal manner. So I can start to add in here, say, a button, and I could duplicate this a couple times, and you see it's by default it's going to lay things out vertically for me. And the reason that it's doing that is because the stack panel has an orientation property which we can set to vertical or horizontal, and by default it's vertical, and we can easily switch it to horizontal. So as you can see here, the stack panel takes care of a lot of this layout work for us and just kind of puts the collection of children UI elements that are contained within it and lays them out in a free form or in a free flowing type of way by spacing them out equally and placing them where it feels as logical. Then you can obviously tweak them, and you can tweak the characteristics of the buttons within here, and you could give them margins if you wanted. So now we've put a margin all the way around this one, and we can do the same thing with the other ones by merely deleting them and then just duplicating these a couple times. So now we've spaced them out a little bit here, which is kind of nice. So this just gives you a very simple way of laying out a UI very simply, either vertically or horizontally, and just letting the control kind of lay things out for you, and then you can tweak it ever so slightly to get that look and feel you'd like. And then finally, one of the other more popular ones as far as layout controls are concerned is the canvas. And the canvas is more of a absolute coordinate system where you can start to lay out UI elements within this canvas and move them around as you would like. And you're going to see an example of this in an upcoming lesson when we start to talk about animations and movement. And typically when you're building user interfaces that are going to have movement of controls or movement of objects, so let's say I were to put a rectangle in here, I can stick in here, I'll give it a fill of red, and we'll give this a width of 100 and a height of 100 as well. So now we can see this rectangle in here. So if we were creating some sort of user interface where we were going to put an object on here and have it move around and maybe bounce from side to side and allow the user to touch it and grab it and fling it around, then typically you're going to be using the canvas control because it gives you a much more freedom to be able to work with the objects, like I said, in a more absolute coordinate system. So I can specifically define where I want it as far as X and Y coordinates are concerned with respect to the entire page itself or whatever space that this canvas is taking up. So those are three of the more popular layout controls that you're going to find yourself working with most often. And now you should be able to fairly confidently, by using a few of these layout controls, and you can definitely use these layouts together if you would like to build very interesting UIs, but they're definitely there to help you to lay things out in a very natural manner and lay things out much more easily for your end user to work with.